Hello and welcome to part 2 of the modelling section. In this section we're going to be focusing on creating all the holes and indents in the iMac, such as the USB holes, the CD and the SD card slot and the vents and all that good stuff. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So to create all the indents in the iMac body, what we're going to be using is the bool, which is short for Boolean. And I've just got the help section opened up here, and this is just to give you an example of what we're going to be working with and how the Boolean object works. So you can see that if you put two objects inside the Boolean object, it will intersect or subtract the two objects from each other. So to get to this help section, all you have to do is, I've added a bool here, and you just right click and go to show help. And you can do that with anything in Cinema 4D, any object or any attribute. You can right click and select show help, and it will come up with the help section right here, and it will give you some examples on how it works and a better understanding. So now that you know a little bit of how the Boolean object works, let's go and put it into practice. So before we start, I'm just going to come up to File and Save Incremental. Okay, so first I'm going to come into the, I think we'll do the back section first. So if you come into the back perspective, and actually instead of doing the back first, what we're going to do, we're going to create the hole on the base. So what we do is come over to the back perspective, and for this we're going to come up to our primitive shapes and select a cylinder, and we're going to come over to the attributes on the cylinder and change the orientation from +Y to +Z, and we're going to move the cylinder to the center of the hole in the base, and we're going to zoom up, and we're going to reduce the radius just so it fits nicely there, like so. And then if we come over to our right perspective, you can see that we're going to have to decrease the height, and we're just going to move, we're going to center it up like so. Now if we come into our 3D perspective and swing round, and what we're going to do, we're going to grab the iMac base, and we're going to pop that in the bool object, and we're going to grab the cylinder 2 and drop that into the bool object as well. And you can see it's gone the wrong way, so what we need to do is just simply move the iMac base above the cylinder in the bool object, and you can see that creates a perfectly nice clean hole for us. And you can see we've got some weird lines going on, but that can be fixed by selecting the bool and coming over to hide new edges, and you can see we get a really nice clean line there. So that's all good at the moment. Now we can go on to the back. You can see that there's a small problem when we go into the back perspective now, and that is that the USB slots are on the wrong side, so the image is actually mirrored. And to solve that, all we have to do is select Shift and then V on your keyboard, and that's going to bring up the viewport options. And if you remember at the start when we added the background image, so all you have to do is uncheck Keep Aspect Ratio, and then put a minus in front of the size X in front of the 1000, and then hit enter. And then what that's going to do, that's going to flip the image, and then all we have to do is decrease the offset X just so it lines up like so. And now we have all the USB slots in the right section. So let's go ahead and get started. So for this I'm going to come up to our primitive cubes, and we're going to add a cube. I'm going to bring this down and decrease the size. And if you hit O on your keyboard, that's going to center the cube, and we can hit T on the keyboard and start to try and get this as close as possible. So about that looks good. And then I'm going to call this cube USB 1, and then we're going to hit Command C or Control C if you're on a Windows computer. So that's Command C, Command V, and that's going to duplicate the USB. And we're going to call this USB 2, and then we're going to hit E on the keyboard to get back to our move tool, and we're just going to move this one over, and we're going to do that again, and we're going to copy and paste this 2 times now. So Control C, Control V, and then Control V again. I'm going to name this USB 3, and we'll name this USB 4, and we're just going to position these USB slots here like so. And now what we're going to do, we're going to add the audio in and audio out circles. So come up to our primitive objects and select a cylinder. And if you hit O on the keyboard, that's going to center the cylinder, and we can change the orientation to +Z. And I'm going to bring that down and hit O again. That's going to center it up. And I'm going to decrease the radius quite a bit. Maybe to 2 or 3, or maybe even 1. We'll try 1.5. And there we go. I'm going to rename this cylinder audio in. We're going to copy and paste that. I'm going to move it over to the right. I'm going to call this audio out. And while we're here, we're going to come up to File and Save Incremental. And now we're ready to do the Ethernet and Firewire ports. So once again, we're going to select the primitive objects, and we're going to add a cube. And we're going to position this cube over the Firewire port, and we're going to scale this all the way down. And we're just going to position this like so. So that's the Firewire done. And we're going to rename this cube to Firewire. And the next one is a mini display port. So what we're going to do for that is add a cube. And we're just going to center the cube on the mini display port. And we're just going to scale the cube all the way down. Now this is actually a mini display port, but on the newer iMacs and the iMac that I'm working on, it's actually 2 Thunderbolt ports, so just bear that in mind if you're working on one of the older iMacs. And for this one, we're just going to add a little bit of fillet and rounding. So I'm going to put the radius as 0.5. or maybe even something smaller like 0.2. Yep. And we're just going to position this like about there. And the last one to do is the Ethernet port, and just before we do that, I'm just going to rename this cube mini display. Now we're ready to do the Ethernet port. Now we're going to create the gigabyte Ethernet port. So once again, come up to our primitive objects and select cube. I'm going to hit O on the keyboard, and that's going to center up the cube. And then we're going to position the center of the cube in the center of the gigabyte Ethernet port and scale all the values down as usual. And then hit O on the keyboard to center it. And just do a few final touches. There we go, that's getting there. And we're going to rename this cube to Ethernet port. And then we're going to copy and paste the Ethernet port, and we're going to move it up, but we're going to scale it down. Just like so. And then we're going to select the two Ethernet ports, hit E on the keyboard, C on the keyboard I mean, so that's C for cat, and that's going to make them editable. And then if we right click and then select connect objects and delete, and that's going to create just the one Ethernet port. So there we go, that's the most of the ports done. And with that done, you just want to come up to File and Save Incremental. So once we've done that, we're ready to come back into our 3D perspective mode, and you can see that the ports that we've created, they're not in line fully. So what we need to do is just try and scale these down. So we want the audio in and audio out, and we're going to decrease the height to maybe 4 or 5, and we're just going to pop those in there like so. And then we're going to grab all 4 of the USB ports, and we're just going to increase the Z value, and then we're going to push them inside of the iMac body. And then same again with the Firewire port, we're going to decrease the size Z and then push that into the iMac body. And mini display port, same again, decrease the Z size and then push it into the iMac body. And finally with the Ethernet port, we're just going to hit T on the keyboard and come back into our model object mode and hit T, and then we're just going to scale it down on the Z axis and hit E on the keyboard to get back to your move tool, and we're going to once again push that into the iMac body. And you just want to try and make sure that these are all in line to the best of your ability. And you can actually have a look inside the iMac body as well, just to make sure everything's lined up and working okay. Now if we come into our right perspective, what we're going to do now is create the CD slot and the SD card slot. So to do that, we're going to come up to the primitive objects and select a capsule. and we're going to scale down the height and radius, and we just want to try and get this matched up to the CD slot as best as possible. And you just want to rotate it to line up with the angle of the iMac body as well. And we're going to rename this capsule CD slot. And then what we're going to do is just Command C, Command V, or Control C, Control V if you're on a Windows computer. And we're going to rename this SD slot. And then all we're going to do is select the SD card slot and decrease the height. And then we're just going to move it down just to match up with the SD card slot. Position it, make sure it's right. And once we've done that, we want to come into our 3D perspective, and you can see that these are a bit far out, so what we need to do is select both of these, come into our back perspective, and then just move these along the x-axis so that it's basically in the very center, like so. And then if we come back to our 3D perspective, you can see that we're going to have a nice opening for the CD and card slot. So we've got the CD and card slot, we've got all the USB ports, we've got the hole in the back of the iMac. The last thing actually is the air vent on the top of the iMac. So once again we're going to select a capsule for this one, not a platonic, a capsule. And there we go. And we're gonna, for this we're gonna come into the back perspective, I think. And we're gonna change the orientation to plus X, I think, yep. And then we're just going to center this over here, and we're going to decrease the radius and height. The radius to about 1, and just want to make sure it's all lined up nicely. I'm just going to move it down just a touch, and if we come into our right perspective again, and we just want to try and get this like we did with the CD card slot, you just want to try and get it in the center, so there's half inside the iMac body and half outside the iMac body. And we're going to rename this capsule air vent. And then if we come back into our 3D perspective, you can see that our iMac is getting there. All that's left to do now is come up to File, and we're going to hit Save Incremental. Now we're ready to add the Boolean object for the iMac body. So you want to come up to this tab and add the Boolean object. And I'm just going to rename the other bool object to iMac base, just so we don't get confused. And we're going to select the iMac body. And just on a side note, I did this in the previous video, but I think it's switched its way back. So you want to select the iMac body, go on to caps, and change the type from triangles to engons. Like I said, I'm sure I did do that in the previous video, but I think it just switched itself back. So with the ball object selected, what we want to do is come up to create object, null object, and then you want to select all of our ports that we've created and drag and drop them into the null object. And then we're going to grab the null object and drag that into the boolean object. Same again with the iMac body, drag and drop that into the boolean object, and make sure that the iMac body is above the null object group. And because if it's the other way around, I'll just quickly show you. So if we move the group above the iMac body, you can see it inverts it, and that's what we don't want. So you just want to make sure that the iMac body is above our null object. And now if we spin round and zoom in, you can see we have our lovely ports, but you can see we've got a bit too much geometry going on here, so that can be easily fixed. So you just want to select the ball object and come up to object and make sure to check hide new edges, and that's going to give us some lovely clean ports. And we can double check all these as well, such as the SD card slot, that's looking pretty good, and the air vent, that's looking pretty good also. And you can see we have some weirdness going on with the iMac base, so you just want to select the iMac base like we just did and select object and hide new edges, and that's going to give us a nice clean edge for the base as well. So this is getting there quite a lot. You can see that there's going to be a bit of work done to the Ethernet port. So what I'm going to do is select our mini display port, and I'm just going to Command C, Command V that. So that's going to copy and paste it. Oh no, I think I've copied and pasted the CD card slot, and that's not what we want. So copy and paste the mini display port, and then we're going to move it over, and we're just going to reposition this just to fit the Ethernet port. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete the Ethernet port and drag and drop the mini display port, and I'm just going to rename this Ethernet port, and then just drag that to where it was, and there we go. And what we can do at a later stage is we're going to create all the bits inside of the USB holes. So we'll get to that at a later stage. And there's one more thing to do, which is there's actually a hole which is the power supply to the back of the iMac. So to do that, I'm going to come into our back perspective, and we're going to come up to our primitive objects tab and select a cylinder, and then we're going to change the orientation to +Z. And then we're going to center this onto the power supply, and then decrease the radius. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit and try and position this as best as possible. That's looking pretty good. Now we're going to create the plug socket, so I'm going to zoom in a bit, come up to the splines tab and select a linear spline, and then just really roughly just draw the basic shape of the plug socket. And don't worry if it's too perfect, because what we're going to do now is, with the point mode selected, which is this button here, and our live selection tool, we're just going to move and reposition these points just so that they're all in straight lines and they line up. So this is just a case of doing it by eye, and it doesn't have to be 100% perfect because it's a really small part of the iMac body and it's inside the body anyway, so you're not going to see it too much. So I'm just selecting different points here and moving them to match up as best as possible. So that looks acceptable at the moment. And I'm going to select the cylinder and again decrease the height. I'm just going to hide the cylinder just for now. And with the spline, what we're going to do is come up to the NURBS tab and select extrude NURBS, and then we're going to pop that spline into the extrude NURBS, and there we go, we get a nice little plug socket. And then I'm just going to select the Fong tag and delete the Fong tag off the extrude NURBS. And with that done, what we're ready to do is, if I turn the cylinder back on, and I'm just going to position it about there, so we have the plug socket sticking out of the cylinder. And what we're going to use to connect these two objects is once again a Boolean object. So if we select both of these and then add a Boolean object, and we're going to drag and drop both of these into the Boolean object, and then come up to the attributes and change the Boolean type from A subtract B to A union B. And then what that's going to do, that's going to create a nice single object for us to work with. And then if we turn back on our iMac body and iMac base and come into our 3D perspective, and I'm just going to need to reposition the axis. And then just move this inside the iMac body. And then if we place this ball into our null object group, what you're going to see is, voila, we have a lovely plug socket. And then we can come into this Boolean object and select hide new edges, and that's going to make it nice and clean for us. And that's all good. So from now we want to come up to File and Save Incremental, so we don't lose any of the hard work that we've just done. All that's left to do now in this video is to create the ports inside the USB ports, and that's going to be pretty easy because all we have to do is select a cube, and we're going to scale this right down. And you just want to position this inside the USB. And just try and scale it by eye to the best of your ability so it fits in nicely. Now once again, it doesn't have to be 100% perfectly accurate because most of the time you're not going to be this close up to the iMac model. If you are going to be doing some product shots of some really close shots, you could put some more detail in this, but just for now there's really no need to go into that much detail at the moment. But if you've got some spare time on your hands, you could always do so. So I'm just going to Command C, Command V this cube, copy and paste this cube, and then we're going to move it over to the USB number 2. And same again, copy and paste the cube, move it over to number 3. Once again, copy and paste, move it over to number 4. The next one to do is the Firewire port. And I'm just going to copy and paste this cube 3. And then I'm going to move it over. And I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm just going to scale it down. So something like that. That's looking not too bad. For the mini display port, same again, copy and paste this cube, and we're just going to move it over, and we're going to need to scale it down, move it down just a touch. Now for the Ethernet port, what I'm going to do is copy and paste this cube, and I'm going to move it over, and if we zoom in and scale it down, just like that, and I'm going to move it up and across. Now the Ethernet ports has lots of these little spiky things, so I'm going to copy and paste these, and we're just going to build up just by eye. We're just going to build up these spikes. Doesn't have to be perfect. And to save time, what I'm going to do is select all these, Control C, Control V, and then just move all them over. And we're just going to center these up. And there we have it. The last thing to do is to do the 3 spokes inside the plug hole. And just before I do that, what I'm going to do is put all these cubes into a null object by coming up to Create Object Null. And we're going to select all these cubes and pop them inside the null object and rename the null object to Ports. And we're just going to move that down to the bottom because we don't need it just yet. And with that done, you just want to come up to File and hit Save Incremental. Now for the 3 spokes for the plug socket, we're just going to use cubes for those. So we want to come up to our primitive objects, primitive shapes, and select cube. And then if we just come into our back perspective, and rescale this right down, and we zoom in, I'm just going to reposition this. So we're going to have one there. We're going to copy and paste that and put one around here. And then we're going to copy and paste that and position that in the middle around there. If we come back into our 3D perspective, and we select these 3 cubes, we're just going to push these back into the iMac like so. Make sure they're all in line, and that is pretty much it. I'm just going to pop these into a null object, so create object, null object, and we're going to rename this null object to plug pins, and then just pop these 3 cubes into the plug pins null object, move that down to the bottom. And if we just have a quick look around our iMac, try and inspect it, try and look up close, see if we've got anything going wrong. So the air vent's looking good. The CD and SD card slot is looking good. The hole on the base is looking fine. We have all our ports, which are looking good as well. Like I said earlier, if you want to put more detail into these, you are welcome to do so. If we have a look at our plug socket is looking fantastic. And I think that may be pretty much it for the modeling section and this video. So in tomorrow's video, what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be texturing this, and then in the next video we're going to be lighting and rendering it. So hope you all enjoyed today's video. I had lots of fun teaching it, and I hope to see you again tomorrow in the next video. So see you tomorrow.